You're listening to Beat Autoimmune and Thrive, the podcast all about reversing and preventing autoimmune conditions so you can live your most vibrant life as soon as possible. We talk about autoimmune root causes, actionable solutions, and inspirational healing stories. I'm Palmer Kippola, and I used to have MS. Today, I'm an author, a speaker, a functional medicine certified health coach, a pickleball player, and nature lover who's helped thousands of people reclaim their health and their best lives. Let's dive into this episode. Hey there, it's Palmer Kippola, and welcome back to Beat Autoimmune and Thrive. I'm doing something a little different today, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. I recently had the privilege of being interviewed on the Better Health Bookshelf podcast, hosted by the insightful and generous Mike Capuzzi. Mike invited me to share my personal healing journey from MS, what inspired me to write Beat Autoimmune, and some of the key strategies from my F.I.G.H.T.S framework that have helped so many others on their healing paths. In this conversation, we dive into root causes like food, toxins, and stress, and I share some practical tips you can start using right away to support your immune system and recover from autoimmunity. So whether you're just starting to explore a root cause approach or you're deep into your healing journey, there's something in here for you. I'm so grateful to Mike for the opportunity and for his permission to share this episode with you here. I hope this inspires you, and I encourage you to check out Mike's Better Health Bookshelf podcast for more great conversations about health-transforming books. Now let's dive in.
On this week's Better Health Bookshelf, I'm joined by the author of the book, Beat Autoimmune, The 6 Keys to Reverse Your Condition and Reclaim Your Health, Palmer Kippola. Palmer, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mike. It is such a pleasure to be here.
It is indeed. It's a pleasure for me. Congratulations on this amazing book. I know it's a few years old. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, but very important book. It's helped a lot of people. You have over 500 reviews on Amazon. This is not some Johnny-come-lately book, so you've really had a big impact. Palmer, we're going to talk all about the book, but before we do, you have a very interesting background. I know it's part of the reason why you wrote the book. Can you share with my listeners a bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Well, for this, Mike, I have to take you back in time because I was 19. I was home from school after my freshman year of college, summer job. One morning I woke up and the soles of my feet were all tingling. You know that feeling you get when you sleep on a limb? And then the blood flows back and you get that tingling sensation. Well, this morning, the tingling didn't stop, but I thought it would just go away. So off I went to work and the tingling just crept up my legs like a vine. And by about lunchtime, it had reached my knees. I knew something was wrong. So I called my mom and dad, who called the family doctor, who said, get her over to the neurologist at UCLA today. So that afternoon, we sat in the neurologist's office and she did a very cursory exam, had me walk across her room, touch my fingers to my nose, heel toe. And she pronounced, I am 100% or near 100% certain that you have multiple sclerosis, MS. And if I'm right, there's nothing you can do except take medication. Well, we had never heard of MS, multiple sclerosis. Of course, 50 years ago, no one had heard of autoimmune disorders, and today they're very, very common. But we were just shocked and confused, and we left her office with very little information and very little hope, and we headed home. And by that time, the tingling had reached my collarbones. And by the time I crawled into bed that night, my mom crawled into bed with me and she's holding me and crying. And this time I'm crying harder because all of the areas from my neck down had gone completely numb and would stay numb for a full 6 weeks. It was, as I mentioned, just a terrifying time. We didn't know what this was. Were my parents going to have to take care of me? Would I have to drop out of school, go to school in a wheelchair? Just no clarity at all. And remember, this was a time before the internet, so 1984. There are no books. There's nothing left to our own devices. So basically, for that summer, I lay on the couch, and I'm so grateful for my parents who were rocks, and for friends who weren't too scared off and who brought gifts and so forth, books, whatever, funny movies to watch with me. And this one family friend came to visit, and she gave me a gift that I didn't realize for years that it was a gift. But she asked me a question as I'm lying on the couch. She says to me, "Palmer, why do you think you got the MS?" "Wh What do you mean, why do I think I got the, are you accusing me?" I mean, I really got angry with her and just was a little taken aback, and she left, of course, and that question never left me, and it turns out that that question, "Why do I think I got the MS?" turned out to be my guiding light, for the next 40 years, and it still remains a guiding light for me in helping my clients recover from autoimmune disorders today. So that was a big deal that summer, and there's one other key thing that happened, and that was, every time my dad would walk by the couch as I lay there, he would look at me and he would say, "Honey, you can beat this thing. I believe in you." Now that I had no idea how that was gonna happen, but what was so profound about that motivation from him was that over the course of the next 26 years, I saw 6 neurologists at leading institutions, each of whom repeated the refrain, "There is nothing you can do except take medication." And of course, then I had my dad on my other shoulder saying, "Honey, you can beat this thing." And there was no guide to show me the way. I just was left to my own devices, but that encouragement put me on the healing path to really figure out, what is it? Why do I think I got this? What can I do? And I'll just briefly share that over the course of those 26 years, the tingling left me and the numbness in time for me to go back to college for my sophomore year. And off I went to various neurologists all over the country, each of whom repeated that refrain, "Nothing you can do except take medication." But I was determined to heal. So I tried every diet under the sun. If I tried vegan, low fat, non fat, you name it, Atkins, if there was a diet with a name, I tried it and nothing helped. Um, I intuited that chronic stress was, in fact, the big root cause. That wasn't a term I used at the time, but I felt like chronic stress was the reason I got into the MS problem in the first place. So I needed to learn how to relax. So I tried every relaxation technique I could figure out or find, from meditation and yoga to neurofeedback, biofeedback, and on and on. And that helped. It really, really helped, because when I noticed that I got stressed out, I would get a flare of symptoms or worse symptoms. And when I relaxed, everything calmed down. But it wasn't until 2010 when I finally saw a functional medicine nutritionist I stumbled upon, literally, who did a bunch of tests on me and found out that I had what's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, meaning I was super sensitive to gluten, even though I don't have celiac disease. And that began my process of healing. So when I eliminated the top trigger foods, including cow dairy and gluten and grains and sugar and so forth, I stopped having tummy trouble after eating. And within a month, Mike, I stopped having MS symptoms ever again, full stop. And I'm always quick to add here that I'm not saying that eliminating gluten is, the thing for people with MS or other autoimmune disorders. What I'm saying is, for me, it was a key trigger, and there's more to the story, but I will just pause because that is, chronic stress and gluten turned out to be 2 of my biggest triggers.
Wow, amazing, Palmer, to hear you after literally decades. And I could tell just by, we're sort of kindred spirits here. You seem to like books, so I can tell probably by your personality. Those were decades of, like you said, research, trial and error. And then almost overnight, if you will, find that solution for yourself, obviously.
Yeah,
Um, it's just, it's amazing. So that was
yeah.
15 years ago. What has the last 15 years looked like once you discovered that for yourself?
Well, I'll just start out with the after of me, because it's really hard with autoimmunity. You really, unless somebody's in a wheelchair, you really don't have a before picture or in a hospital bed. And I was adamant that no one take pictures of me. My dad liked taking pictures, but I refused to have anybody take photos. So you can imagine, if you will, being sidelined. not being able to participate in things, not living life fully. Um, in my worst, besides the numbness and tingling, I had a bout of optic neuritis that took me to the hospital emergency room 3 times in Johns Hopkins to try to figure out what this was. My legs felt as heavy as lead. All of these are invisible things, right? We can't see these, but they kept me from being who I truly am. And oftentimes, when I was in the corporate world, I was working. People thought I was taking vacation when I was really seeing a neurologist or in the hospital. So it was a um, just a really, really stressful period of time. The after picture is I have zero symptoms. I have more energy. I am fitter in my 50s than I was in my 20s and 30s, and I play competitive pickleball. I am standing at my desk. I am active all the time. I have zero symptoms. I take no medication. And I I just, I want people to have this freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to ask you, but it almost sounds like you wrote Beat Autoimmune for you 15 years ago. It
Yeah.
sounds like that. It's a common theme I'm coming across more and more, why health and wellness authors write these books, because they found a solution for themselves and they want to share it. But let's talk about who should read Beat Autoimmune. And if you don't mind, Palmer, because I'm sure, obviously, if someone's going through that, they know. But even just for listeners who might not even know what you mean by autoimmune disease, can you just give a
Yeah.
very high level?
Absolutely. Let me start by giving a contrast. So, autoimmune disease happens when you have an overactive immune system, whereas cancer happens when you have an underactive immune system. So, back to autoimmunity, autoimmunity is an immune system problem. It's not a body part problem. So, helpful for people to understand that. It's not, I didn't have a problem in my brain, even though the myelin sheath was destroyed by my own immune system. Similarly, when somebody has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, they don't have a thyroid problem per se. They've got an immune system problem. Their weak link happens to be the thyroid, which gets attacked. So, um, ground central for autoimmune disorders is in your gut, which is where 75 to 80% of our immune system lies. So, this is really important that people have an appreciation that gut health is foundational to healing. And conversely, how we're treating our guts and what we're eating and what we're taking and putting into ourselves matters greatly, because healing is all about removing the things that are harming our guts, healing and sealing it so that we can stop that autoimmune cascade as it's known. So, in let's look at last century. It was thought that autoimmune disease, once somebody has something, that they will have it forever, that it is incurable, that there's nothing you can do except take medication. And I'll actually come back to your question in terms of why I wrote the book. Mike, I actually wanted to intervene in the moment when somebody is told that they have an incurable autoimmune disease and there's nothing they can do except take medication, because from my research, from my personal experience in working with so many clients, nothing can be farther from the truth. There is so much that people can do. And I wanted to help simplify the steps back to good health so that people could be empowered to take control of their health outcomes. And yes, I also thought about myself and that young woman who was so desperate to heal. And if I could just help one person, that's what I was hoping to do with the book.
And does autoimmune disease, Palmer, it encompasses a lot of different. Can you just share a couple of those just to give,
Yeah.
again, folks who might not be, maybe they're not suffering, but maybe somebody in their family or a friend, like some of the more
What are
common.
they?
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's such a good question, because when you talk about cancer, I'm just going to use that as a contrast. You say lung cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, everything cancer. But when you say MS, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's, you don't say MS autoimmune, Hashimoto's autoimmune, and yet those are autoimmune disorders. They're about 150 by, recent count. And even certain disease processes for heart disease and dementia are thought of to be autoimmune in nature. So it is a vast category. Even long COVID, it turns out, has an autoimmune component, and so does chronic Lyme disease.
Wow. So you wrote Beat Autoimmune a few years back. And again, as I was saying before we hit the record button, it's, the number of esteemed folks in the medical, functional medicine world who have reviewed and just highly, highly recommended the book. Very impressive. Again, over 500 Amazon reviews. That's no small feat. And I only share that because it's a book that has changed lives. And what I found interesting, you were kind enough to send me a copy, is again, we're probably similar in some of the way we think. I loved how you broke it down into the 6 sort of lifestyle factors that really people need to be aware of. We want to encourage people to grab a copy of the book, read it, implement it. But for the sake of this conversation, Palmer, can you share whether it's a tidbit of each of all 6, maybe at a high level, and then maybe dive into 1 or 2, just to give folks an idea of what we're talking about here?
Absolutely. So, when I finally decided to write a book, I'm a word person, looks like you are too. I wanted to come up with a word that represented all of the categories that must be addressed. And so this is after I quit my day job in 2012 after I healed to study autoimmunity full time. And what I found was so exciting to me that I wanted to shout it from the rooftops. And my way of doing that was to put it into a book. But one thing that I kept finding over and over and over again was scientists and the conventional medicine community talked about mysterious environmental factors. They don't really know why people get autoimmune disease. And I thought that is such bunk. There are clear there are clear studies about all of the factors that lead to autoimmunity. So as I did the research, I put things into categories. And I looked down at my list of categories, the 6 categories, and it spelled a word. And the word that emerged is FIGHTS, which stands for food, infections, gut health, hormone balance, toxins, and stress, which is a huge category, which includes childhood trauma. So those are the categories. And I figured I wanted a word that people could remember all the things they need to do. And I hadn't come across a book that looked at all of those categories. There were books that had pieces of it, but this is why it became so important for me to get this out as a book and to really share the science, the stories, and the strategies. And when I say stories, I mean of people, doctors, who used to be conventional medical doctors, for example, who themselves developed an autoimmune disorder. So this isn't just me sharing a book about my story. It's the story of all of these people who also healed. And what I'm doing is illustrating the importance of those fights factors. So I can sure give talk about several of them. And I thought I would touch on maybe the top 3 from my perspective, because it's a lot. People ask me all the time, do I have to do all of them? And the answer is probably. But to get your arms around it and get started, I thought I would help people to understand what I think are the tippy top ones. Number 1, first and foremost, is in the food category. You gotta stop eating gluten. And when I say gluten, it's an inflammatory protein that's found in grains. And you've probably heard that it's in wheat, rye, barley, etc. But it turns out that there are different types of gluten in all grains, including oats and rice and corn, which is a grain. So these gluten particles are highly inflammatory. And there was research that came out in 2015 that says that gluten creates a leaky gut in anyone who eats it. And so, as I mentioned at the outset, a leaky gut, the technical term for it is intestinal hyperpermeability. In other words, your small intestines, where we're supposed to absorb and digest and absorb our food, stay open. Those gates stay open, and big protein particles can get into our bloodstream, which is what sets off our immune system. So it turns out that gluten is the biggest baddie when it comes to food, because it's like you got your thumb pressed down on the garage door opener. The door is going to stay open. And what happens when your garage door stays open? The bad guys can come in. So in order to take your thumb off the garage door opener and let the gates close, you got to eating the things that are going to keep the gates open, and gluten is the first one. And that there are not enough tests for all the types of gluten there are. So people might be listening to this and say, well, I can have oats because it says gluten-free. Well, it turns out a lot of these grains are cross-reactive with gluten, which means your body thinks it's gluten, even though it doesn't say gluten on the package. So that's my first advice for people, is to stop eating gluten.
And Palmer, real quick, because this interests me so, is that gluten and everyone hears, if you can't, if you're into health and wellness, you can't not hear about the issues with gluten. Is that something, or are you aware, is that something that is relatively new, or has it always been? Because I've read how, big ag, the farm food industry has just bastardized the wheat and the grains and all that. And that, you can go to Italy, for example, and you're
Yeah.
fine. Is it a cross the board thing, or is it something more about what has been done to the food?
That's a great question, and I don't know for sure, but I will say that I would direct people to a couple of sources for more information on this. The first is Alessio Fasano, who's a medical doctor and at Harvard Medical School and head of celiac research. And he was the one that led the study that shows that gluten creates a leaky gut in anyone who eats it, from 2015. But before that, he and his team discovered that there were three elements necessary for autoimmunity to develop. And one is you have the underlying genes for it. So I probably have the genes for MS. The second is that I have encountered these mysterious environmental factors, let's say heavy metals, let's say chronic Lyme disease, let's say mold. Those things fill my toxin bucket. But it was Dr. Fasano and his team that discovered the third element that needs to be present for autoimmunity to develop, and that is a leaky gut. And so his research all centered around gluten. This is a man who's from Italy. He's written a book called Gluten Freedom. So I am trying to get Dr. Fasano, if he were listening to this, it's an open invitation for him to come on my podcast, because I want to get to the bottom of this too, Mike. And you hear a lot of people that go to Europe and can eat things with no problem. And then they come home to the States and have all kinds of problems. And so the question is it the glyphosate that's sprayed on the wheat, or the GMO crops that are built to withstand the spraying of glyphosate? So the answer is probably all of the above. And I don't know if and why and wherefore gluten became such a problem that it is. And maybe today we have the super gluten because we've hybridized this wheat. And in the past, it was, our ancestors' grains did not look anything like the grains that we're eating today. The maize that we ate in last century looks nothing like the, big ag profitable corn that's grown. So there's a fabulous movie, by the way, called King Corn. If you haven't watched that documentary, highly recommend it. Anyway, so that's my answer. It's a combination of probably all of the above.
But okay, so the bottom line is, if you are suffering from an autoimmune disease, um, your recommendation is just cut gluten. Don't
Yeah.
try to, like, oh, I can do it this way or that way at this point. Just at least to get started, I suppose.
You know, everybody's in the best position to do their own research. And so removing something, the best, most empowering experiment that I ever did was led by that functional medicine practitioner back in 2010, who had me remove all those usual suspect foods. The classic thing is called an elimination diet. And I found that to be such a negative sounding term that I rebranded it as a 30-day food vacation. So you take those things out for at least a month.
Okay.
Better yet, take them out until your symptoms fade or disappear. Because for many people, Mike, it is as simple as removing those inflammatory foods. And that sounds crazy to people that have never heard of this, but that's why I say start with food, because it's the highest leverage category. And if you still have symptoms, then you go deeper. And that's what I help guide people through in the book. And which brings me to the second thing that I will say is gut health. So I'm asked all the time, what should I take for this autoimmune disorder? People want to know what to take. What supplement should they take? And this is where I start feeling like the bearer of bad news, because I'm really recommending to remove things and remove the things that are harming us, usually harming our guts. And we've been treating our guts like garbage disposals with the food that we eat, the sugar we eat, and even excess medications. So it turns out that there are more than 100 medications that are known to induce lupus, which is an autoimmune disorder. And it even has a name, drug-induced lupus. I'm not joking. And the drugs, the medications that are implicated that have been proven to trigger lupus include heart medications like high blood pressure, antibiotics, and biologics, which are given to people with autoimmune disorders. So it's super ironic. And cancer medicine often creates a leaky gut on purpose so that the medication could get into the bloodstream faster. This is why I'm not against medication. I'm just asking people to be judicious in when you're going to use antibiotics, when you're going to take certain things. And maybe a goal should be to minimize things that you don't absolutely necessarily need. Um, Chemicals in our food, our water supply, in our air, in our body care products. I mean, these are things that people can control what you put in your mouth, what you put on your body, what you have in your home. Oftentimes we have toxins in our home, including mold, which no one ever wants to find or hear about, but it's a big baddie. Turns out to be one of the most immunosuppressive toxins that is known to man. Um, Plus plastics and aluminum. So these are things that people can do something about. I'm always so hopeful because I guide people through these are the toxins you can remove, and you're just bringing your toxic load down. And that leads me to the last thing under the remove category, which is remove stress. And that's going to be my third thing I wanted to talk about. It turns out that chronic stress creates a leaky gut. And this is something I learned in the last year. It blew my mind. It blew my mind. So it's not just these external factors, these toxins out there. Sometimes it's our own thought processes and our internal mental spirals that create this level of stress. And we're supposed to have stress in our lives, and not all stress is bad. Some stress gets us out of bed in the morning and has us do great things. It's the toxic, chronic stress that keeps us stuck in that fight flight mode that our bodies just don't know it's safe. And when we don't feel safe, we don't heal. It's as simple as that. So anything that you can do to lower your stress load, and one thing that I help people with is I actually advise doing a stress surrender sheet, like getting out a piece of blank paper, which I love writing things down. On the left-hand side of the page, you write all the things that are stressing you out. And on the right-hand side of the page, you write, what are you going to do about those things? Get it on paper and decide, are you going to do it? Are you going to ditch it? Are you going to delegate it? Or if there's nothing to be done about it because it's something you can't control, are you going to give it to God, the universe, source, your partner? Give it to somebody else, just if there's nothing you can do about it. And then write down by when you're going to do that. Give to somebody else. And I did this as part of my healing exercise to when I felt more stressed than I could imagine with MS symptoms, caring for both of my parents who were in hospital beds, an hour plane flight away. I was VP of sales for a company. I was sitting on boards. I had more stress than I could deal with. And I literally did this exercise on an airplane. And by the time I got off the airplane, my shoulders had dropped down because I decided what to do with each thing that was stressing me out. And it's an exercise for freedom that I feel if you have any stress in your life, get it on paper, decide what you're going to do about each one. And it for not just extra credit, but I'll say, this is a balancing act, because the definition of stress that I love the most is stress is what you feel when you perceive that the demands on you exceed your capacity to cope. So it's two-part, the demands on you and your capacity to cope. So for the demands on you, get it on paper, decide what you're going to do with each. And for your capacity to cope, I advocate adding joy. Get another piece of paper out, write down your joy list of everything that brings you joy that's simple and free and that you can do, taking a hot bath, talking with a good friend. It can be very, very small. Reading a good book, look at us with all our books behind us. Do something that brings you joy each and every day, and that's going to help balance out that toxic stress and create an environment for healing, the parasympathetic nervous system, which is where healing happens.
Wow. And Palmer, the book is a blueprint for folks that are experiencing the effects of autoimmune disease. You've helped a lot of people, not only with the book, but with clients. Someone might be listening to this, and again, it might be for themselves, maybe a family member. And it's a lot to take in, right? This might be the first time they're hearing about this because they're so, traditionally oriented or whatever. What word of encouragement would you give that person? Like, is it really, and I don't want to minimize because I know nothing that you shared is simple, but it is simple on one hand, but it's not easy maybe. But if someone is so in tune just to doing things the quote normal way, the way that's always, you see on the TV commercials and all that, what would you say to that person?
I would say hope is real. Healing is possible. I make no guarantees that people can completely recover, but I will say that greater levels of healing are always possible. Autoimmune disease is reversible and preventable. And this is what I hope to get across in my book. It's no longer the life sentence that the medical community understands. Sometimes it takes more than 20 years for science to trickle into clinical practice. There is no need to wait for double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. Just try something small. If you want stories of hope, I got them in the book. If you want bite-sized strategies to begin healing, go to my website, palmerkippola.com, and you'll find I've got healing stories. I have blog posts that are all about breaking it down into simple steps that people can take. But I want people more than anything to know that healing is possible, that autoimmunity is reversible, and there is so much they can do.
Well, your story and everything you've gone through is testimony to that. And to see the pivot in life you've taken now and the passion and belief that you have. So again, thank you. Congratulations on just making the impact that you're making. Palmer, I know you have a gift for my listeners. Can you describe that? And then, yes, you mentioned your website, but if folks want to be more connected to you, learn more about your services, where can they learn all that?
Yeah. So the gift is an optimal food guide because you are in the best position to figure out the foods that are optimal for you. So I created a 12-page ebook that will help guide you through figuring out what are the foods you should be eating. Everybody is slightly different. So there's no dogma here. And if you go to palmerkippola.com/gift, there you can enter your information and I will send you the optimal food guide so you can get started on your healing journey. And in my experience, research, and perspective, food is the best place to start when it comes from unwinding these autoimmune disorders, but figuring things out like what should I be eating and what are the best healthy food habits that I could have and what are some healthy swaps. And people need a guide to get started, and that will get people on the right path. As far as reaching out to me, I am on Instagram at palmer.kippola. My website is another great resource. I work with people one-on-one, and they can learn all about that on the website.
Very good. Well, Palmer, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it. And again, thanks for all the wisdom you shared.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends and family, and if you feel inspired, please leave a quick review so other people can find it too. Now, if you want to beat autoimmune and thrive, make sure you sign up for my free video training at freeautoimmunetraining.com. That's freeautoimmunetraining.com and watch the first video right away. Take good care. Bye for now.